Corporal Mud here. I'd like to start this off by thanking God for the idea for this story and this video.
Well, I'm only a few Mondays late. I appreciate the new subscribers since that last video. If you guys have any ideas or suggestions to improve my future videos, please let me know. Now, let's load up. Battle of Dimensions, Part 9. Goodbyes. It wasn't hard to find our platoon. They're on the west side of the facility, going through and sorting all the fallen personnel's gear into personal and military issued piles. I saw her flak. The back of it was all crimson. As I stared at it, my platoon mates noticed me, and Sergeant Mitchell came over and put his hand on my shoulder. Mitchell was a tall, pale redhead from North Carolina, the same state most of the Scottish ancestors came to back in the 1700s. He was a rather quiet person and did more watching and listening than he did speaking, which was unusual for people of his heritage. He was an excellent Marine and a solid squad leader. He was actually supposed to be in charge of Robertson's second squad, but Staff Sergeant messed that up. He usually worked extremely well with Sergeant Finley. The way the two complemented each other gave nothing but positives. But I will say this, Sergeant Mitchell has seemed more reserved since we got Roberts. I looked over to Mitchell and he said, "Mud, I am sorry. I know you two were close, so I made sure to grab her name tape on her flag for you." Mitchell reached into his pocket and pulled out a crimson-stained wooden Velcro name tape that said, Riley. A wave of emotions came over me, and I had to fight back tears again. I stared at the name tape for what felt like an eternity. I finally managed the words, "Thank you," and I reached out and grabbed it. Mitchell simply nodded to me. I opened my hand and stared at the name tape, and everything around me faded away. And I thought to myself, I will always remember the failures. That I promise you, Riley. Mitchell shifted and everything came back into focus, and I looked up to him and asked, "Can you do one more thing for me, Sergeant?" Mitchell replied, "Yes." "Can you replace my name tape that's on my flag?" I asked. He answered, "Absolutely," and he took her name tape from my hand. I turned around so he could switch out the name tapes. He ripped off mine and put on Riley's crimson one. With a smack on my back, he signaled to me it had been done. I turned back around and said, "Thank you." Mitchell simply nodded again. That was just the way he was. He wasn't big on words and was more of a watcher than a talker. After a few moments, Mitchell quietly said, "I'm sorry you had to deal with Roberts. I want you to know that I argued for you to lead your squad. I know what happened, and as much as I wish I could say that he would be held accountable, he won't be. And it will be simply swept under the rug." I looked at him perplexed and asked confused, "How? We literally have multiple witnesses and our glasses recorded it all, so I don't understand how it's possible for it to be swept under the rug." Mitchell looked away. Then after a few seconds, he looked back at me and quietly said, "Bear and Roberts are excellent manipulators through various means, and they are very, very good at getting away with some very terrible things. I should know. I've witnessed their ruthlessness firsthand." I asked, "What happened? What did they do?" Mitchell took a deep breath and said, "There was a Marine by the name of Sam Winlock. He was a good Marine and was going to graduate number 1 in our class. But he had caught Roberts and Barry cheating and had proof of them cheating throughout the schoolhouse. Unfortunately for Sam, rather than giving the proof to the instructors and letting them sort it out, he confronted them both about it, alone, on the Canyon Bridge. Though he had me come along, he asked me to wait up in the tree line out of sight so he could handle the situation. I heard yelling, and I got to a better spot to see the bridge. That is when I saw them throw Sam over the railing into the canyon, and I watched my friend die. I never got to say goodbye to him because of those monsters. The two of them wiped all the security cameras from that day clean, so the only thing that the investigators could do was take their story, which they made up an elaborate one, that they made a joke that was so good, so great, that they made him laugh so hard that he fell backwards over the railing. Mac was lucky, so were you. You made Roberts look bad, so now they have a vendetta against you. Why didn't you just come forward? I asked. Mitchell replied, because they're weasels and would have been able to get out of it. You can't deal with them the usual way. We need to fight fire with fire. That will take patience and an opportunity. I know you want revenge, and I want it just as much as you do, but we have to play it smart. Understood? Yes, I replied. Mitchell said, I'm sorry that this happened. And he gave me a hug and whispered, we will get them. And I thought to myself, this explains why he extended with our unit when he heard we were getting Bear, rather than getting his own platoon. I'm sure he didn't anticipate Roberts, though. When we ended the embrace, the platoon was looking over at us. Blake broke the silence and asked, so, what's the word, Mud? I replied, there's a convoy coming here soon to bring reinforcements and to take our casualties home. I'm leaving you guys tonight, and I'm escorting Riley home. One of our newer Marines asked, how's Hill? I replied, he has broken ribs and should be back after healing up. Blake asked, Corporal, I know this isn't a question you want, but do you know where we're going to be getting replacements from? He was right. I didn't want it, but I sighed and replied reluctantly, I don't know. Probably from another unit. There was a long silence until another one of our newer Marines awkwardly asked, will you be gone for a long, or when will you be back, Corporal? I answered, I don't know. A week or two? It won't be too long. I paused, and I thought to myself, I need to break this tension up. Then it hit me. I smirked and continued, I can't be gone too long, or you devil dogs will win this war without me. And I can't have that, now can I? Rah! They responded with a unified rah! And I thought to myself, that was motivating. After a long pause, Sergeant Mitchell said, hey, let's finish sorting this gear. Mud, get your gear and get ready to head out with that convoy. Jenkins, help him find his gear and make sure he doesn't get lost going to the Vicks. Jenkins replied, certainly, Sergeant. I looked over to Mitchell, confused, and said, Sergeant, I'll be good. Mitchell shook his head and said, you need to keep your head on a swivel. No need for dumb casualties. Then he winked, and I thought to myself, what? Oh, Roberts and Bear. I nodded to him and was about to leave when Blake asked, Corporal, can you take my letters and mail them when you get stateside? Several others asked the same thing. I nodded and said, absolutely. I was handed a stack of 20 or so letters, and I stuffed them into my left cargo pocket. I said goodbye one last time, and Jenkins and I were off. We headed over to the LAV that we had taken cover by when the ground pounders blew the door. We went to the far side of the LAV. Sure enough, our day packs were still there, including Riley's. Tears started to well up until I felt like we were being watched. I started to casually look around, and Jenkins quietly asked, what is it, Mud? I replied, I feel eyes on us. Jenkins started looking around as well. After a few moments, I found the culprits. It was two Marines 50 yards in front of the LAV. Even from the distance, I could tell from the figures' frames that it was Roberts and Staff Sergeant Bear, our two untrustworthy leaders. I elbowed Jenkins and gestured to the pair. He looked over and said, I wonder what they're discussing that far away from everyone. I replied, nothing good. Let's grab the bags and go elsewhere. LJ replied, okay. We grabbed the 3 bags and headed for the road gate that had been set up. I figured York would be there and there would be too many people for anything to accidentally happen. As we approached, I noticed 2 machine gun emplacements covering the approach, along with 2 Marines guarding the road, and one of them was indeed York. I didn't say anything until I got close to him. As I was about to speak, he turned towards us and asked, "What's up, Mud?" I replied, I figured I would ask and see if he knew anything about the convoy coming. York nodded and said, "You should have been here a couple minutes ago. Lopez was just over here, and he mentioned that he'll be here soon." I exhaled, letting my body relax just a bit, and replied, "I had some good news. We can get our casualties loaded up and get them out of here." York asked, "Are you escorting your Marine home?" I simply nodded, and York continued saying, "Well, if you want, we can ride together." I nodded and replied, "Sounds like a plan, York." Jenkins and I remained at the gate with York and the other ground pounders until the convoy rolled in. It wasn't a long wait, maybe 10-15 minutes max. After it came, LJ and I went back to the platoon to grab the last of Riley's personal gear. I said my last goodbyes, made a promise to my platoon that I would get Riley home safely. Then I headed for the vehicles. The convoy was 12 vehicles long, and York was waiting by the second JLTV. I threw Riley's and my gear in the back seat. York asked, "Are you ready?" I replied, "Yes and no." He nodded and said, "I understand." We continued to wait silently for the order to load up. As we got the order, Roberts came up to me, and I fought the urge to knock him out. He smugly said, "Watch out for those Chinese night stalkers. I hear they like attacking night convoys. Safe travels, Duke." I retorted, "You wouldn't be so lucky to get rid of me in an airstrike." Robert said, "Maybe I'll get lucky." I retorted again, "I doubt it." Robert smiled and smugly said, "We'll see," and walked away. I shook my head and climbed into the JLTV, slamming the door. I exhaled, and I thought to myself, he's just trying to screw with me. Night Stalkers were the Chinese most advanced fighter. It was deadly compared to the J-20 and all that aircraft shortcomings. The Night Stalkers were fast, nimble, and stealthy. They would tear apart our remaining 4th-gen aircraft. The platform was a problem for us. The one positive thing was that it was out in relatively small numbers, like the Germans' jet aircraft in World War II, so the odds were slim to none to run into them. The Chinese could penetrate our radar with them, so they would use them to go after our larger convoys, but nothing close to the size we were running. But because we were near the front, it was possible. I took a deep breath as I felt us start to move. York looked over at me and asked, "What did that piece of trash want?" I answered, "To screw with me." York shook his head and said, "What a piece of work. You should just ignore him, Mud." I replied, "You're right." York said, "Hey, Mud, I'm going to get some shut-eye. If you're going to still be up, wake me up if anything crazy pops off." I replied, "Will do, but I will probably be lights out not long after you." York replied, "Okay." York then rolled over onto his side and almost immediately relaxed. I looked at Riley's bag, and something about it was pulling at me. So I reached over, pulled it to me, and started going through its contents as we drove into the night. And I thought to myself, I'm just glad this awful day is finally over. Well, that's into part 9. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. The next part will be titled Terrors of the Night. I'll be trying to get that out when I can. Thank you. God bless you. And this is Corporal Mud.